Hello, it's Julie from Spellbound, and this is the second video in a short series about how to string beads. Today I'm going to show you how to string a multi-row necklace coming all together onto two calots and onto the fastener to give you a really professional and neat finish. Now I'm using bright coloured beads, but equally it could be pearls, elegant jet, or any beads of your choosing. I hope you'll give it a go. It's a really easy technique and it's a great one to have in your armoury. I have the beads set out that I'm going to use for the different strands of my necklace. I'm going to make a graduated strand necklace, so I'm going to have a short strand in red, a slightly longer strand in oranges, a little bit longer in green, and so on through the spectrum to make a rainbow necklace. Now these are all pre-prepared seed bead mixes from the Spellbound range. Now to fasten off the end of the necklace to bring all the strands together, I will be using a pair of calotte crimps and I've got a clasp. And to do the stringing we're using Nymo D. I'm using it double and I've chosen a grey colour because it's a neutral to go with my various colours I've chosen in the beads, and I've got a size 10 beading needle. Now I've prepared the needle with a double thread. I cut 3 meters of thread, popped it through the eye of the needle and brought the two ends together. So I've got a double thread to do my construction with. Now in the previous video in this little series I showed you how to start off the end of the thread by adding a calotte crimp. So I'm going to do a quick resume. The calotte crimp has got a little hole on the hinge, and what we're going to do is we're going to pass from the inside of the calotte to the outside, leaving behind an anchor. And we're going to make the anchor from a single size 10 seed bead. I'm going to thread that onto my double thread nearly all the way down to the end, and then I'm going to pull one of the threads out of it. So as you can see, it's now just on one of the threads close to the cut ends of our length. I'm now going to hold the two cut ends together and I'm going to tie them in a simple overhand knot. So they're joined together, and then I can run my seed bead down to sit above the knot, and that makes our anchor for the calotte crimp. And now it's just a matter of threading on our calotte crimp. And I go from the inside of the cups to the outside, and I need to make sure that that little bead is pulled up tight against the knot on one side and against the inside of the calotte on the other. I'm just going to make sure that my thread is even all the way up the length, and I can start to thread. Now I'm going to start with red, and I don't particularly want to start with a bugle against my calotte crimp, because sometimes a bugle can be a little rough on the end, and if it rubs against the calotte it can cause wear on the thread. So I'm going to start with at least one seed bead, but that really is the only decision I'm going to make. I'm now going to go completely randomly and pick up beads as they come to the needle. You can see you can get quite an interesting texture by just working randomly. Right, I'm going to continue in this manner until I've made the strand long enough for the shortest strand of my necklace. Now I have cut myself a piece of cord. It could be ribbon, it could be yarn or string, that's the right length for my shortest strand, and I will keep that as a reference so I can keep measuring my beading against my reference, and when I'm up to the right length I'll be back to you to show you how you start the second row. I've threaded on sufficient of my seed bead and bugle mix to make up the length that I'd pre-calculated with my little bit of cord. I now need to add the calotte crimp on this end of the design. Now I'm going to pass from the outside to the inside of the cups and bring it down to the last bead. Now previously, when we did a single row necklace, I then added a bead with a permanent knot and we closed the cups. However, we want to make a second row, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a bead so I can turn the corner with the needle. So I'm going to pick up a size 10 seed bead. I'm going to bring it all the way down and let it sit against the hole in the calotte, and then I'm going to pass back out through the hole in the calotte. I need to be careful here because the thread can snag around the hook, so be careful that it pulls all the way through. And now I've got my thread emerging in the right place to make my second row, and I can come back along with my yellow and orange beads, mirroring the length of this, and then I will add about 1 centimetre to the overall length, so the new row will sit just below the previous row. So once I've threaded on all of those beads, I'll be back to you to show you how to turn the corner at the far end. Before I start though, I just need to make sure that all the beads are tight against one another, they're tight against the calotte, and then I can get started. And I'll be back to you when I get to the far end of the row. I've put on sufficient yellow and orange beads now that I've got a full string, plus as you can see I've got about 12 millimeters extra in length in the orange compared to the red, and I've held this up and it gives me just a little gap at the centre front when the necklace will be worn. So I'm happy with that extra little measurement, and I will try to make the green string that much longer than the orange, the turquoise string that much longer than the green, to continue the graduation. But for the moment I need to connect this end of this strand to the same calotte crimp. I'm going to pass through the hole in the calotte to emerge on the inside, and make sure that there are no loops of thread anywhere along the length. Make sure everything's pulled up nice and neat. Now when we turned the corner at the far end, we added a seed bead and then went back down through the hole. In this case that's not necessary because we've already got a seed bead there. So I'm going to pass through the hole in the seed bead, and then I can pass out through the hole in the calotte crimp. And I'm ready to start row number 3. That's going to be green, and off we go. Now I have enough thread to complete this row, and then I'll be back to show you how to start a new thread at the far end. I've threaded on sufficient green beads now to make this strand 12 millimeters longer than the yellow strand. which means it's actually 24 millimeters long than the red strand, and that sometimes is easier to measure against the original strand. So there we are, that's just the right length past the end of the red strand. So now we're going to finish off this strand inside this calotte. So I'm going to go through the hole in the calotte, and I'm going to pass through the bead in the calotte too. Now I haven't got enough thread to go all the way back to do a fourth strand. So I'm going to remove the needle at this point by cutting the thread, leaving a nice long end, as you can see. And I've pre-prepared a new needle ready to start. Now I'm going to pass through the bead in the calotte, this is a double thread again, 1.5 meters, and I'm going to pull through almost to the end, and then I'm going to pull one strand through, leaving just a short strand. So the short strand there is from one side of the new thread. And to bring up the other end of the new thread, bring the two ends together and tie a knot. Now this is just how we started the first calotte end. So there's that knot. And now I'm going to pass through the hole in the calotte. I need to do this gently so that I don't catch on the thread ends I have just created at the end of the green strand. So pull those out of the way. Nearly there. That's it. There's that little knot, and it needs to pull down to the seed bead. There we go. And so I've now started a new thread which is tied on to the same seed bead, and this is the end of the new thread, two little cut ends. This is the end of the old thread. Now I don't want the old thread to come loose, so I'm going to use this opportunity to tie those two threads to the two tail ends from the new thread. There we go. So all of those thread ends are now secure, and I can get on with my next row. And this row is going to be turquoise. So I'll be back to you when I've added my turquoise row. Well, I've finished the turquoise strand and I've measured it to be about 36 millimeters longer than the red one, which means it's 12 plus 12 plus 12 millimeters longer than the red. If you remember, the orange was 12 millimeters longer than the red, the green was 12 millimeters longer than the orange, and now this is 12 millimeters longer than the green, altogether 36 millimeters longer than the red. I've held it up, I've made sure that I've got the nice graduation that I wanted, and now I can turn the corner again. So it's into the hole in the calotte, so make sure we keep all these loose ends out the way, because that's where you get into a bit of a pickle if you're going to, as I did then. There we go, but we need the ends to help us finish off when we complete the design, so I don't want to cut them yet. Right, I've gone through the hole in the calotte, I go through the hole in the seed bead, and back out through the calotte, ready to start the blue row. It's getting a little bit congested now, but I can still see there's the hole in the calotte, and out I come. Now I've got enough thread left on my needle to do the blue row, turn the corner at the far end, and add the purple row. When I've done these 2 rows, I'll be back to you to show you how to finish off both ends neatly. As you can see, the design has grown a little. I've now got 6 strands. We started with red, then we did orange and green, then I added in a new thread and we put on the turquoise, then the blue, and at the end of the blue row I turned the corner through the other calotte and came back and added the purple row. Now the purple row is 12mm longer than the blue row, which was 12mm longer than the turquoise, etc, etc. And when I'd measured the extra 12mm, each time I held up the necklace in a curve, as it would be when I was wearing it, just to check the spacing was right, because sometimes just 1 extra bead or 2 extra beads will make all the difference to how it sits. Okay, we're ready to finish off the necklace now. So I've got just a little bit of thread. As you can see, I only just managed it with the purple row, and I'm going to pass into the calotte crimp at this end of the design. I'm not going to go through the bead. It doesn't matter if you do go through the bead, but it's not necessary. Right, now at this end, this is the end I started the whole design. I've got my original 2 tail ends and I've got the needle end of the thread I've just finished. So I can tie these 2 ends to the double thread I'm just finishing with. So it's left over right, right over left to make a reef knot, and just to be extra secure I'm going to do the same again. If in doubt, always tie another knot. There we go, so that's nice and firm. Now before I close the calotte, I'm going to use the jeweller's best friend, or certainly the beader's best friend when it comes to finishing off inside calottes. I've got a little dab of nail polish or nail varnish. I happen to be using clear, but as it's inside the calotte it doesn't actually matter if it's a colour. Right, I'm going to use the 2 thread ends to help me to position the knots and the seed bead in the middle of that cup. And then I'm going to use a pair of pliers to close this, but you can just use your fingers. Close it down over all those knot and bead conglomeration, and you can see that's really neat. Just looks like a silver bead. Right, let's go to the other end. Now here we've already got an extra set of ends because this is where I started the second thread. As you can see, it's quite an accumulation of thread and bead there, but it doesn't matter, it's all going to be covered by the calotte. Now this thread has escaped from one side of the calotte or the other. That's better, that's in the right place. Now I can give this a little paint. Position the knots and the bead in the cup, and this time I'll close with my finger. There we are. Right, now it's just a matter of trimming threads. So in close with the scissors, trim. And the same at this end, in close with the scissors and trim. And we're nearly there. We just need to add our clasp. Now I'm using a bolt ring because the beads themselves aren't particularly heavy, they don't need a big clasp unless you prefer to use a larger one. But I've extended out by adding a jump ring to either side because the ends of the necklace are quite bulky with all those strands. It's quite difficult to get into a smaller clasp if you don't allow a little bit of elbow room. Those little 4mm jump rings give us that elbow room. So onto the hook, close the hook across, and as we did in the previous video, just give that loop on the calotte just a little squeeze to elongate it. That makes it stronger. And do the same at this side, hook it on, bring the loop across and a little squeeze. And there's my graduated rainbow necklace. Now obviously I've done 6 strands there. You can do a few more strands. The hole in the calotte is big enough to take up to 8 double strands of nymo, or you could use 2 calottes side by side, but equally you can just do 2 strands or 3 strands or 4 strands. But I think it's a really neat professional way to finish off a multi-strand necklace, and I just love the colours. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoy your beading.